of Luna is a podcast with me, Bridget Engels, as your host. Here we have conversations with real live, present-day goddesses who are actively and courageously doing their magical work in the world. Each episode is a bewitching journey with relevant discussions on topics such as Wiccan pagan spirituality, writing, culture, magical practices, art, ritual, and the craft in its many forms. Merry meet! Welcome to another episode of the Oracle of Luna podcast. I'm Bridget Engels, your host, and today I'm very honored to chat with the extraordinary Danu Forrest. Danu is a Celtic Wisewoman, Seer, and author of several books including Celtic Tree Magic, Wild Magic, Celtic Folk Traditions for the Solitary Practitioner, as well as her new oracle deck called Celtic Goddesses, Witches, and Queens. She lives in Glastonbury, England. Welcome, Danu.
Hello. It's a delight to be here. Lovely to meet you, Bridget.
Yes, I'm really excited to chat with you. I'm a longtime fan, and I've just got a lot of questions for you today, so let's get rolling.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So, as I always kind of start out with the show, I briefly ask how your spiritual journey began as a Celtic witch and seer.
I've kind of always been on this path, really. I first started practicing quite seriously at about 11. I was very dedicated by about 13. So that was a long, long time ago now. I've recently turned 50. Um, but both sides of my family have always been quite spiritual and quite psychic and have lots of stories and ideas about things. So it's always been a kind of a natural progression really for me. Nobody batted an eyelid that I took this path in my life, a lot, in my family. So it was a very sort of smooth, obvious transition. I've always seen spirits and things, and both sides of my family, the Irish side of my family, they live in the Boyne Valley, and they're used to seeing all sorts of strange things and having um, deep spiritual experiences in relationship to the landscape and things. My father was very psychic and stuff. So it's always been an obvious natural thing for me to be doing, actually. So
Yeah.
kind of a strange one. There's not many sort of, families that are like that on both sides, but I'm quite fortunate that everybody was very accepting of what I get up to, actually. Yeah. So it's been a long road, but it's always been in relationship to my landscape and my heritage, really. I mean, this path doesn't exclude anyone that isn't um, sort of based in Britain or Ireland or anything like that. But I've just always had a very powerful relationship with my landscape, really. So it's just unfolded from there. Yeah.
And you grew up in England?
Yes. Yeah, I grew up in the southeast of England, actually. But I mean, this obviously, I'm getting a little bit older now. And where I grew up was a very small little village, actually. So it was a beautiful place to live. It was actually very rural and very pretty.
Oh, that sounds
It's a
really
lot more built up
magical
now, but
and
but yeah,
enchanted.
yeah, absolutely wonderful, magical part of the land with lots of folklore and stories about the supernatural and things like that attached to it. So a wonderful part of the land. But I've been here now in Glastonbury, which is in the southwest of the UK,
Hmm.
for about 25 years. So that's half my life.
Mm.
Um, and Glastonbury, of course, is very famous for its spirituality and its
Oh,
its
yeah,
mystical side.
absolutely.
It looks very otherworldly today.
Oh, it
Very,
is.
very, very full of blossom and elderflower, and everything's looking green
Oh,
and lush here today.
uh, that sounds lovely. So what made you decide to start writing? Did you go to college and decide study writing?
Yeah, well, I remember being very, very little, probably about 6 or 7, and actually reading The Hobbit. Don't know if you've ever heard of The Hobbit by Tolkien, and The Lord
Mm-hmm.
of the Rings. My
Yep.
parents read me that when I was really little, and I actually wanted to be a novelist when I was little. So I always wrote fairy stories and folk tales and learned as many stories as I could for kind of storytelling and things like that. And I was really immersed in our folklore and our kind of folklore and fantasy really when I was a
Yeah.
child.
And it sounds
And
like
I
your
thought that's what
family
I
was a
wanted
big
to do.
influence.
Yeah, absolutely. But actually, by the time I was in my mid-20s, I was quite naturally writing about paganism and things, and it just took over from kind of novel writing, really. I still have never finished a novel, and I don't know if I ever will. But it just became a natural thing to kind of, I think I started writing little articles and things from pagan magazines and kind of coven newsletters and things. And they
Yeah.
were always just really well received. So it just grew really naturally. But I've always been writing. I was the sort of child that was always writing, and it's just been a I can't imagine not somehow.
Yeah.
Writing and storytelling and all that kind of sides of things have just been a very natural part of my life for always, really. But yeah, originally I was going to write some great fantasy novel, and of course I never have. Here I am, lots of magical books later, and I love what I'm doing. It's fantastic, but it wasn't the original plan.
Yeah. Well, you're the author of several books, and I remember looking at some of your books a while ago in Seattle at East West Books, and it
Oh,
was Celtic Tree Magic. And I started flipping through it, and then eventually I bought it. But I also have been intrigued by your book, Wild Magic. And can you tell us a little bit about this amazing book and what inspired you to
yeah.
write it?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's that one was a book I wanted to write for a really, really long time. Um, Over here, of course, I'm kind of my kind of pagan kind of culture
Mm.
around me has been kind of for a long time in the 90s when I sort of was first kind of growing into this world was very sort of there's a lot of Wiccans around and things like this. Um, but I always felt that we had indigenous native spiritual practices that weren't necessarily that kind of Western magical traditions that we know now, that we had
Right.
older materials to work from. And the further I've gone in my practice, the more I've been sort of researching these very early old materials and finding old ways of practicing magic that perhaps were more related to our folklore and our native traditions, that were more the practices of the kind of cunning folk and wise women and things like this, rather than the kind of rather modern kind of Wiccan stuff. Nothing wrong with Wicca and all of that, but over the years, my kind of my love of the really old folklore and old folk magic techniques have just become much more dominant in my practice. I Over the last sort of few years, I did a MA in Celtic studies, and now I'm doing a PhD in Celtic studies and folklore, and that has really informed a lot of my practice since before I returned to university. Actually, it was all about for me. It's all been about almost like magical archaeology, really.
Yeah.
Um, Finding out the older materials and finding out the traditional ways to do things. And sometimes you can learn them from other practitioners. I live in a very small little village just outside of Glastonbury, but it's a Glastonbury address, but it's a tiny little village with not very many houses in at all. And there's a few people around here that have been practicing for a long, long time, but they wouldn't even give a name to what they do. My grandmother was another character like that. She came from the north of England and she used to practice all sorts of things. And her ways, she wouldn't have called herself a Wiccan or even necessarily a witch, but what she did is what we would now call kind of folk magic, really, which is
Yeah.
these old, really old native practices. So I really, really wanted to produce a book that was all about fully connecting with the land and remembering the old stories and the old teaching tales and old techniques, to kind of re-remember that ancestry, that magical ancestry that we have in this land, because it's such a rich resource to draw from. It's
Yeah.
so relevant today with our kind of working closely with the land and being better with the environment and healing ancestral wounds and things like this. Remembering those old ways is a really rich store of wisdom to draw on, really.
Hmm.
So it was a labor of love for a long, long time to want to write that book, and I'm very, very pleased with how it's come out.
Oh,
How many
yeah.
people have been
It's
how
very
many people have been
impressive.
nice about it. It's been like it's really lovely when people like what you do, and but it was a very personal book for me. It
Yeah.
was very sort of labor of love.
Oh,
Yeah, so
yeah.
it's a
You
little
can
bit
tell.
different, a little bit different than kind of more formal sort of ways of practicing magic. It's a little bit wilder, a little bit
Hmm.
based much more on relationship to the landscape wherever you are in the world. I mean, these are traditional Celtic techniques, but they're relevant wherever you are on the earth, really.
Hmm.
About building that relationship again, between
Hmm.
us and the spirits of the land. Very important stuff, really.
Yes,
I'm honored to do a
absolutely.
tiny little piece of that work, but it's something for all of us to do.
So, what is the? I was reading through the book, and I just it struck me that the ideology and the cosmology of the Celts is very
Mm.
different. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the three-part Celtic cosmology and
Ah.
how this influenced the early Celts' spiritual connection with nature
Mm.
and their
Yeah.
understandings. Yeah, because
Well, we have we
that's a
have
big deal. I
oh, it's a huge question. I don't know if I'd have time to answer it in here.
very in
But
short, yeah, if you can.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have this idea of earth, sea, and sky that is
Right.
found throughout a lot of the earlier materials, but we don't have. If we're talking about the Celts, we have the kind of like later regions of Celts, or the later generations of things, so the last few hundred years, and then we also have the kind of Iron Age Celts of like 2,000 years ago. And there's a kind of continuum between those two places, but we've lost some of the really, really early materials. So we don't have like a fixed system, but we
Sure.
have this idea that keeps returning of working with earth, sea, and sky and working with threes. So three is a really, really
Yes.
important magical number.
Oh yeah,
Um,
and the symbol of the Triskele and
yes,
upper
yes,
world. Is
yes.
it the lower world, middle world, and the upper world?
Yeah, yeah. That's
Okay.
one of the meanings, and that's one of the it kind of it can be used in lots of different ways. So earth, sea, and sky, but then often sky would be related to the upper world and perhaps the realms of the gods. But then the other world in the Celtic tradition is usually found over the sea or over water. Or sometimes in the Welsh tradition, we have the idea of a noon or a Nalvan is its older pronunciation, and that's the idea of the deep place, which also is a kind of suggestion of kind of deep water and ocean and things like that, but it's also like a consciousness shift.
Hmm.
So the sea kind of represents that sort of shift in consciousness, deep emotions, the subconscious, perhaps, all of those kind of
Yeah.
things. So we kind of access the other world by shifting our perceptions rather than necessarily having to physically travel to it. But of course, in our older stories, it's a physical destination that we travel to. And of course, we are beings of the land. So we're sort of situated between earth and sea. But that idea really is this the Celts, the early Celts for sure, had this idea that we were essentially reincarnated, that we would, when we died, we would become one with everything, really. But that we would naturally in time be born again. There's lots of sort of hints in the older stories about fallen warriors being kind of dunked into huge cauldrons and things like this, and from whence they are reborn. So we have
Hmm.
this idea of the cauldron perhaps being like the sea, or
Hmm.
the womb of the goddess, the womb and the tomb, and all of that, and then kind of being reborn. So it's like a
Hmm.
kind of an endless cycle between those
Right.
three realms of earth, sea, and sky, really.
And sort of echoing life, death, and rebirth.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, that's the other main idea about this triplicity. The triple spiral represents the earth, sea, and sky, but you can see lots of different ideas in it. I mean,
Oh yeah.
the main triple spiral actually in the Celtic traditions is found on the entrance stone to Newgrange, which is very near where my family, the Irish side of my family, live. They live just across the Boyne from there, and that triple spiral on that entrance stone, it's quite a famous, beautiful carving, but it's 5,000 years old,
Woo.
and that seems to have inspired the idea of the triple spiral in the Celtic traditions. But that's its earliest
Hmm.
example in Ireland and in the UK.
Right.
The
But
UK
it's
is
to
Ireland.
me,
Yeah,
in reading your book, I guess sort of if I had to really, really narrow it down to the essence, the Celts' spiritual connection with nature was so profound. It informed their whole existence, right? I mean, they were immersed in everything
yeah,
about their
absolutely.
natural world, and that was their spirituality, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have many gods in the Celtic traditions, and often they're gods of the wilderness, or they might be gods of the hunt, or sometimes they're gods of the sea, or various things like this. But the earliest stories we have about the Celts is that they had many gods, like I'm talking, say, 2,000 years ago and more. They had many gods, but they didn't necessarily give them human forms. So they would have names, they would have stories, but they were forces that were ever present in nature. So they could take a human form if they wanted to, but they didn't have to. They weren't like the Greek gods who were
Yeah.
kind of humanized sort of super beings. They
Mm-hmm.
were the forces of nature, uh, kind of given, or not given, but kind of that had kind of coalesced into identities, that had coalesced into intelligences.
Mm.
So, like for instance, the god Tyrannus of the storms, he would be the storm. He wasn't like a Zeus character commanding a storm. He was the storm, which
Right.
is a subtle difference, you know. So
Yes.
there's not a difference between there's not a separation between the kind of Celtic awareness of nature, of humans being separate from nature. We're all one thing. We're all connected, and we're all part of that nature,
Correct.
including our gods.
And
Yeah.
nature
So
is divinity.
yes, exactly, exactly, and that kind of is quite a subtle shift in consciousness, really.
Yeah,
You know, but
definitely.
it's one that kind of encourages us to have much more of a immersive and kind of ecstatic relationship with nature. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
very powerful and very um I think it kind of encourages us to be much more ecologically minded, I think.
Yeah, it's very
Um
relevant.
yes. Yeah, exactly. And our relationship with nature now is part of how we honor the gods, really.
Yes.
That's always been the way. I mean, there's always been kind of parts of nature that you shouldn't disturb, or trees that you shouldn't cut down, or things like that. We've been kind of really closely entwined in the kind of Celtic traditions wherever we
Yeah.
find them across the
And
UK and
also
Ireland
and
and
also the
countries.
fairies. Do you want to talk about
Ah,
the fairies a little a little bit? The fairy realm in Celtic
oh
folklore?
gosh, yes. Well, I mean, that's it. I mean, the fairies are such a huge subject again.
Yeah.
Um, but again, they are perhaps understood best as dwelling in that otherworldly place, that deep place, as we know it in the Welsh Noon. Um, it could be understood that they are perhaps kind of in a closer relationship than with the land than we are,
Mm-hmm.
but in a sense of how would I put it? In a kind of much more sort of constant sense of psychic communion, really, with the landscape. But also amongst the fairies are the dead, are the ancestors. And there's many stories right up until the early 20th century, where, especially in Ireland and places like Ireland and Scotland, where people are talking about when they die, they will go into the Hollow Hills and join the fairies, join the Sidhe. Um, so some would particularly be kind of Christian throughout their lives, but still honor and recognize the Sidhe and still fear the Sidhe and the fairies. But others would feel like they were beings that were seriously respected, but at the same time that were somehow our local, our landscape, um, our local gods, perhaps, are the beings of power in our landscapes that we would become one with when we died. So that idea that the dead and the fairies kind of live together is a very old idea.
Mm-hmm.
But it is that sense of perhaps of sort of seeing the kind of Celtic cosmology like layers of an onion, you know?
Yeah.
They're closer to the source, they're closer to the sort of soul of the landscape, really. And when our time is done, we join them in that state of being closer to the land.
Yeah.
There's so much that you could say about
So
fairies,
much. I
and
know.
it's all contradictory. It's all contradictory by its nature. But I kind of love that, really. I love that idea about the fairies that we get into some kind of closer relationship to the land. And I love that there's no fixed thing. Everywhere you go and you research the fairies in the Celtic traditions, you'll find uh, um, contradictions and mysteries and things that you have to unpack rather than ever come to a fixed conclusion. Our relationship with them goes way back, and it's our spirit realm, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, like you would find the spirit realm anywhere else around the world. The spirits are honored and feared and respected, and sometimes ask for help, and sometimes we need to rescue people from them, and this, that, and the other. And the fairies really are best understood as our spirit realm in the Celtic
Mm-hmm.
traditions, our
Mm-hmm.
spirit.
Folks that live outside of UK,
Mm,
in other parts of the world, how can we develop, or how can everybody develop a personal relationship with land spirits or guardians of the
mm,
place
yeah,
wherever we live? Like I'm right now, I'm in the desert, so
yeah,
there's a lot of stones and canyons
mm,
and
yeah,
cactus, and the stones seem like the old ones.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, of course, none of these things are exclusive. They're not. nothing about the kind of Celtic traditions are only for people that live in a certain part of the world or have a certain bloodline or any of that. That kind of stuff is absolutely not part of the Celtic traditions at all. We have to remember that Celts, especially the Irish, have always traveled. They have always traded with other people. They've always moved to other countries and back again, and so on and so on for thousands of years. That that kind of world traveler idea is very much part of the Celtic traditions and part of our heritage, part of our ways to behave. Um, and those ideas are not, they don't belong to any one nation, they belong to humanity. So wherever you are in the world, I mean, I have students that live in the desert, and I have students live kind of up in the mountains, and students in Brazil and Taiwan and all sorts of places. And it depends where you are, how you do it. But
Yeah.
essentially, you build up that relationship. I mean, in the Celtic tradition, we don't tend to command or try and control the spirits or try and kind of control nature in any way. Instead, it's we build up relationship, we make offerings, we offer our love and our friendship. We get to know the land slowly over time and care for it. So that can be things like picking up rubbish or putting some energy into an environmental concern or something like that. Or it can be as simple as walking to the same place on a regular time and sitting and being with the landscape somewhere that feels powerful and present to you, and just getting to know it and letting it get to know you and building that relationship over time.
Hmm.
I mean, there's some places where, of course, we need to be aware of native peoples who've lived on that landscape before us or whatever, and
Yeah.
that has to be a kind of person by person, context by context kind of delicate process whereby we're honoring anyone who was there before us and any kind of cultural impacts and colonialism and things like that. But we can also bring the traditions of offerings, of making gifts to the land, and of building relationship. We can do that very gently and very patiently. And by doing that, we can heal an awful lot, actually. But it
Hmm.
takes time and patience. I mean,
Hmm.
traditional offerings over here would be things like herbs or perhaps a bowl of cream or a song or a sort of poem or something like that. They don't have to be grand things. And I certainly would always say that any offerings that you make on the land would be best to be no environmental impact or very
Yeah.
little. Be very aware of wherever you are.
Yeah, I
But
think an
yeah,
energetic gift
exactly,
offering.
exactly. That is absolutely fine and in many ways brilliant. So going to a place and talking to it, you know,
Mhm.
getting to know it, being aware of all the things that live there, being aware of how it feels or the little details of it over the kind of period of a year or different times of the day, and giving it our love builds that relationship and honors it over time. And I feel like the spirits of the land, wherever we are on the earth. I know I've taught people all over the planet now, and I've been to an awful lot of places, and this is a foolproof technique of just being with the earth. It gets recognized, and the spirits will recognize your efforts. And sometimes places have a lot of trauma or they aren't
Yes.
used to being honored, and it takes a bit of time, so you need to be patient. But that patient gentle care really will pay off eventually, and it's
Mhm.
a crucial work these days. Part
Oh,
of our
yes, it is.
mending our relationship with the land is absolutely central.
Yeah,
So yeah,
absolutely.
it depends where you are in the world, but just gently, but really putting the time in and building that relationship. And from there, so much can come. Spirit allies can come, assistance can come, magical training can come, environmental healing can come, all of those things, but it has to be based on relationship.
Yeah. Moving on, you also recently published a new oracle deck called Celtic Goddesses, Witches, and Queens, and it's beautifully illustrated by
Ah,
Dan Goodfellow. Can you tell us a bit about who these powerful women are in this oracle
ah,
deck?
yeah. Well, I'm glad you like it. And yeah,
Love
the
it.
well, I mean, Celtic goddesses are very popular. One of the things about kind of Celtic traditions is that female characters in our mythology, our folklore, all of those things, the women in Celtic culture in the real world historically were often far more empowered and legally empowered than they were in other parts of the world. And I'm talking even say sort of 2,000 years ago, and sort of over the last 2,000 years, women had the right to own things and have a voice in society in a way that wasn't perhaps the case in places like kind of Rome and Greece and stuff. Um, so we have some amazingly powerful Celtic goddesses in our traditions, and powerful women to draw wisdom and inspiration from. And it was just an absolute delight to work with Dan and create this deck and just go for some of the women and sort of share some of the information about goddesses that were very popular, people like Bridget and Morrigan and things, but
Mhm.
also to kind of explore and introduce some of the goddesses that perhaps less are known.
Yeah.
Um, sort of people like sort of Nematona, the goddess of the sacred grove, or Miss is a fantastic woman from Irish folklore, and sort of Irish, sort of medieval Irish literature. Really, it's a very old healing story about a woman who loses her mind in grief and becomes like a wild animal,
Hmm.
and slowly she finds healing and kind of returns to the world. Um, and there's a really powerful story about that's a
Yeah.
really powerful example for women in the world today, because we all have times where we hit rock bottom
Oh, yeah.
at some point or
Like
other, and how do
Persephone
we.
in The Descent,
Yeah,
or
absolutely. And
Inanna.
how do we interact with that experience? How do we learn from it and grow and heal through it into a new phase of our lives is part of the perennial story for women, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, there's all sorts of goddesses and kind of sort of women and queens and things like that are in there. We included Boudica as well, which
Hmm.
is a very, I mean, she's a historical character that we know from the sort of Romano-Celtic period 2000 years ago, and she fought
Right.
against the Romans, and
Yeah.
she was terrifying. She nearly threw the Roman Empire, the Roman army, out of Britain, but she didn't manage it. But at the same time, she sounds like a very terrifying woman, and an awful lot of bloodshed occurred during those times. So a difficult woman to necessarily remember. I mean, she's not a sanitized character at all. But again, it's like, how do we draw on the feminine examples
Examples. Yeah.
in our
That's what I was
heritage?
gonna say.
But how do we unpack? How do we handle things like our anger and
Hmm.
things like that?
Hmm.
What do we do with that now? I mean, we don't want to necessarily find ourselves fully immersed in our rage, but at the same time, there are times in life where that is the healthy response. So how do we steer? So I felt like it was quite important to include characters like her that were a little bit more difficult in an oracle deck, so that they could really
Yeah.
meet the challenges that we find in life, rather than just the kind of love and light easier ones.
Yeah. They're
The
very
ones that actually can
multi-dimensional
answer.
characters.
Yeah, exactly. Ones that can actually be a real ally to women in all the aspects of our journey. And we also designed them to be used as a devotional tool as well. So each of the goddesses in the deck has a kind of a history, and I've used a lot of my kind of academic side to kind of really give a grounded um, sort of explanation for each of these goddesses and where they come from and why we think they represent what they represent.
Yeah.
And we've also given them, of course, a divination meaning, and then we've given them a prayer. So each of the goddesses and witches and queens have got a prayer to them to help connect with them sort of devotionally, so that we can
Yeah.
work with them as gods and as spirit allies, or
Yeah.
however it feels right for us. I kind of really want to put the power in the hands of the women or the men
Yeah.
reading and using the deck to uh, have a really full range of
Right.
characters to draw on,
Yeah.
and to
I was
be
really,
companions.
yeah, I was outside and consecrating my deck, this deck a week ago, and
Oh,
I
lovely.
was thinking in my mind about Anya, and then I did
Ah.
pull Anya, and it was like, wow. I hope I cleanse this deck, because that was pretty powerful that she popped out. And
Ah.
in the back of my
Oh,
mind, I was thinking about Anya like a few days beforehand. So anyway,
oh,
just
fantastic.
thought
Well,
I'd
we're
tell
not
you
far
that.
from the summer solstice now, and she's really related to the summer solstice.
Oh yeah,
So
and
she's an excellent
fairies.
choice to be pulling now, and the fairies. Oh yes, yeah, she's a queen of the fairies. Now, summer solstice.
Yeah, that's
So
coming
yeah,
up.
good one. I think you're going to have a good summer.
I hope so. Well, what are some of your upcoming plans for the future, real quick? Do you have any new
Oh,
events, books, workshops?
yeah. Well, it's a very busy time for me actually. I've got all sorts of little events here. One of the things I know. one of the major parts of my life, of course, is that I'm a mother. So I've also got kind of school run and normal things to get through
Sure.
in part of my life. But I've got a new deck, not a new deck, a new book coming out in December on the goddess
Ooh.
Ceridwen. She's a
Oh,
Welsh goddess,
yeah.
and how to work with her. That's coming out in December. And then I've got a new book coming out next summer with Llewellyn, which is all about folk magic, but this time more to do with the home and hearth. It's that side of things. So a kind of
Oh,
wild
love
magic
that.
is an awful lot about the connecting with the wider land. And this is all about, this is a real storehouse of lots and lots of really ancient historical little spells and charms and magical techniques for working with at home, to look after your space and to look after you and for healing and for caring for children and elderly and all of those kind of things. A real kind of home and hearth kind of book, you know.
Yeah.
So
I love
actually,
it.
you know, it's been a glorious day here today, but I've been sat in my garden. I'm lucky enough to have a garden full of trees, so
Oh,
it's been beautiful today, and a little shady. And I've been getting on with editing all day today,
oh,
and I'm
yeah.
looking forward to doing a lot more teaching out on the land over the summer. But I do a lot of teaching online as well these days. So if
Yes. So
anyone
what
ever
is your
wants to look me
website,
up, oh,
Danu?
well, my website is danuforest.co.uk,
Okay.
and I do all sorts of things. So you can find me on Instagram and Facebook and things. And I do stuff internationally and locally. So, you know, it's an ever rolling kind of program of things that I get up to at the moment.
So if
But
people
yeah,
wanted to learn more about you, they could find your courses
yeah.
on your
Yeah,
website.
absolutely, absolutely. And I always welcome people getting in touch. Sometimes I teach people one to one. Sometimes I run online events, and I have a couple of online regular meetup groups and things like that. I have a wheel of the year, kind of regular Zoom ritual that I have. So we have a working group
Oh,
there.
oh,
So we
I'd
have
like
all
to do
sorts of
that
things.
sometime.
Oh, well, you'd be very welcome. Yeah,
Well,
I'm
that's
very easy to
awesome.
find.
Thank you so much for spending time with us today. Thank you for your radiance and your beautiful inspiration for
Oh,
us to
thank
learn
you.
how to channel our wildness and all your scholarly and creative work and writing about Celtic magic. And I wish,
Delight to talk to you, Bridget.
yeah, I wish you all the best. And
And you.
yeah, thank you. And happy summer.
Yeah, you too. You too. Benocte. Take care.
All right. Blessed be. Thanks to all our listeners for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you. Bye
All
bye.
right. Bye bye.